everybody. Welcome to today's live stream. I'm JK from Animator Island and glad you could make it this morning or this afternoon or evening or whatever time it is there. Today we're going to be talking about the tricky subject of color. But before we jump into that, I wanted to note a few things, some housekeeping stuff. First of all, if you are a regular to the Monday morning or Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time live stream, you may have noticed that last week there wasn't one. That was because I was traveling. We went to see our goddaughter, who is 16 months old and adorable, and it was a wonderful time with family. As always, family comes first, so there was no live stream. However, there was a new video available, so I will share that real quick so that in case anybody missed it. It is the one there that says 2 ways to grow your audience with my face on it and a little grow your audience text tag there. So if you missed that live stream and you wanted an update, there was an update, just wasn't live. And you can go ahead and check that out if you're interested in not only gaining an audience with your art, but just kind of detailing some things about art that are sort of in the background that we don't necessarily consciously think about every time. I'll probably reference it a couple times during today's live stream, but I wanted to make note that that was there for you in case you are interested. Okay, so with that out of the way, today we're going to, as I said, talk about color. A little bit of background in case you're new to the live streams. My name is JK. I have been an artist for going on 40 years now, and for about 30 of those years, I have been practicing one particular style, which I would call newspaper comic style. It's in the style of the comic strip Foxtrot. If you've ever seen that comic strip, it's a really good one. I definitely recommend it. But it's a very graphic, relatively simple, and generally black and white art style that I have been doing for a long time. So I never really needed to necessarily worry about color. I never needed to dive deeply into color. So one of the purposes of this series of live streams is to develop a new art style after 30 years, to see if I can intentionally change my own art style into something that suits me better or what I'm looking to create going forward, because the days of my creating newspaper comics are pretty much over. So now it's time to try something new. So today, when we're going to be talking about color, we are, I think it's important to note that I'm going to be giving you things that have worked for me and some tips and tricks and things like that. But I'm still also in the process of figuring this color stuff out because I haven't had to work with it for a lot of my career. I mean, obviously I did plenty of things in color, but it wasn't as heavy as it is if you're trying to do like digital painting or illustrations that are highly focused on color and things like that. So we're going to dive in. I think that's everything that I need to note this morning about upcoming things. As I mentioned, yeah, we're going to jump into the lecture, but as I mentioned, I am trying to do this live stream every Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So if you missed one, they are recorded on YouTube. You could check them out at Animator Island TV, along with all the other videos that we have for Animator Islanders. And check them out. And if you can stop by at 10 a.m. Eastern on Mondays, great. Works for me. I'll be here. Hopefully. That's the plan anyway. All right, let's pop that down and let's get into our lecture for today. So today is going to be a little different. We're still going to do a sort of lecture and then an analysis and application part. And then we're going to end with a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. HMT says, hi, JK, or hello, JK. How's it going, HMT? Good to see you. Good to see the folks who are stopping by this morning. So for our lecture today, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Instead of diving into color theory, we're going to kind of talk more about technique for finding color, for developing your sense of color, for working on your artistic intuition. I don't know if that's familiar to you. There's a video at Animator Island TV on artistic intuition. I definitely recommend that you check that out if you're interested in the topic. But there are 1,000,002 videos and resources on color theory. So if you need to work on your color theory and you want to learn the hardcore theory stuff, like you know, um, primary color versus tricolors, all that stuff that gets very math heavy sometimes. Anyway, if you want to learn that stuff, there are a lot of great resources out there. We're not going to cover that today. Personally, it's just me. I find that stuff dull as dirt. Like it's stuff that maybe you want to know, probably you should know, but oh my gosh, when I was back in art school 20 some years ago, I would fall asleep in color theory class because it's so dull to me. It was like, what? We didn't focus on application. We just focused on the theory. And that's great. It's good to know your theory. You really should know that stuff, but it can be really boring. So we're going to skip the theory this morning. I do recommend you check out some other resources on the theory itself. And we're just going to talk about the application more. We're going to talk about those techniques that you can use or that I have used that really helped me. And hopefully some of them help you too. So, first thing that we need to talk about when it comes to color is that, like uh, facial proportions in characters, color is like a game of millimeters almost. So what I mean by that is a tiny subtle shift in color can make a drastic difference. Just as tiny shift in where you put the eyes on a character can make a dramatic difference in that character. And so there are certain aspects of art that are really minute, that are just tiny little details that really change everything. And you might not even be consciously aware of how it changes things, but you'll feel it. And color is one of those things. So you can have one kind of green that is very off-putting and you have another kind of green that is very appealing, but if you tweak the appealing green just a little bit, it can turn it into super appealing. So the difference between something that is good in quality and the difference between something that is great in quality when it comes to color is very small. And so I'm not sure how much you're going to even get to see. Like, it depends on the monitor and how things are working. Um, there may be times when I'm shifting colors by such a small amount that you don't see a visible difference. Sometimes that's what you have to do when you're working with color. You have to shift stuff in a tiny, tiny way in order to get it to pop the way that you're hoping that it will. And so a lot of color, in my opinion, is experimentation. It's exploration. And if you don't incorporate that yet into your art, I definitely recommend it. Sometimes, and this is from me speaking, I guess I could pop this up and make it big for a second. This is me speaking. I have for most of my career wanted to get to the end result, like the final, the whatever I was going to show someone. And so I didn't experiment and practice a whole lot because to me that felt like wasted time. It was just like, well, I'm doing a bunch of art, but nobody's ever going to see it. So why should I do it? And that wasn't good for me. And so that's something I'm paying for now and I have to reincorporate. But one thing that I definitely recommend is that you take time to experiment with your art. Take time to play with color. Take time to play with shapes. Have some fun, but even if it's not fun, still do it. Because even though you may never show anybody that stuff, you might go through pages and pages or files and files of just experimentation and play. It's going to be absorbed into your artistic bloodstream. And so it's really important stuff. So if you don't allow time right now for play and for exploration in your art, try and incorporate it into what you're doing. It's really going to make a big, big, big difference. So I definitely recommend that. Okay, so all that being said, what we're going to do right now is I have this character that I did over the past week or so. It's a couple hours in at this point. I did some roughs, just experimenting with some hairstyles and things. But I landed on this image with this kind of more final inked. It's not perfect. It's not maybe everything I want it to be, but that's okay. It's progress. It's me practicing. And so we're going to walk through what I would do when I wanted to color a piece like this. And so one of the things that works for me in my workflow is to begin by picking a color I don't want to use. Okay. And hopefully you'll see why I'm doing it this way. It is a struggle for me as an artist to uh it's kind of like this indecision, right? When I am white knuckled and like nervous, my art suffers as a result. And I think that that's true of most people. So, one of the things I have to do is stay loose. One of the things I have to do is get out of my own head. A friend of mine said that there's a word in German for what's wrong with me. It's basically being overly cerebral. It's this thing where you're just like thinking too much, and you need to just kind of let go a little bit. So one of the things that helps me when I get into that state, or even if it's just this where I'm like, well, I have to figure out a color for this to start with. What do I figure out? There's a million billion infinite colors maybe, and I don't know where to go. What I'll do is I'll start with a color I don't want. Okay. So I do not want this girl to be blue. So what I will do is I will open up my little color picker here and I will go to blue and I will go somewhere in the middle here. As you can see on the screen, I'm hovering somewhere in the top middle, which will give me a pretty saturated color. It won't be too gray. It won't be too saturated. It'll just be kind of a middle ground. But I'm going to pick this blue. I don't want her to be blue. I don't even know if there's going to be any blue in this entire image, but that's where I'm starting. And the reason I'm starting there is because it will allow me to kind of fail quickly almost. It's not even necessarily a failure thing. It's a way for me to put something down and then change it because I don't like it. If that makes sense. So you'll see as we go along here. I'm going to pick my blocking brush, which we talked about in a previous live stream. It's just a brush I made that's extremely simple. And I'm going to go in and I'm just going to start filling in my character here. Now, because these are lines, I could technically use the fill feature. I could drag the little blue icon in the corner down and start filling stuff that way. I prefer this method where you're actually going in and filling and kind of painting in the color because I'm just going to be doing kind of an outline or yeah, like the exterior part. And for me, this is almost a moment of meditation or relaxation. Like this is pleasant to me. I enjoy zooming in here and just kind of filling in and going through the lines. Like this is zen for me. This is very meditative. This makes me feel calm. And I think that that's a nice thing to have when you're working on art. So, does this take longer? Yes, this takes longer. But I think my quality of work improves by my doing it this way rather than just flat out filling it. Because sometimes, again, one of the things that I sort of struggle with is trying to rush to the destination instead of enjoying the process. And this is one of the areas where I can enjoy the process. I like doing this. It reminds me of the old days when I was young, where I would just sit in color, often with my mother, and it was just pleasant. So that is why I'm kind of doing it this way. Now that I have that outline in place, I can go ahead and grab the circle, drag it over and fill it. And then she is fully blue, except up here in these leaves because I have too big of a brush to get in there. So I'd have to alter the brush size. So I leave that to the end. Now, I just did that relatively quickly, right? But there's another way that you can do this sort of process. So I will start a new layer. That way I have this one for later. And let me show you the second way to do this. If you want, you can kind of paint in faster and then go back and erase. So what I mean by that is I could go in and I could just kind of quickly do some fills like this. I'm still doing my outline approach, but uh, I'm not taking my time quite as much. I'm doing this rough and loose. I could even go here in the leaves because it doesn't matter that I go past the lines. That's now done. I can fill it in. And so that was even quicker. But as you can see, we've gone outside the lines in some areas, right? If you do that, you just grab your eraser tool and you can go back and you can erase those areas away. And sometimes I like to work this way instead because it allows me to immediately get the color down or whatever it is down on the screen. And then I can go in and just kind of clean up. One of the big tips that I'd have to offer to people that I don't think is talked about a lot is this idea of using the eraser almost as much as you use a brush. Like, don't worry about needing to use the eraser. Use it. It's there for a reason. So you can use it as a tool. You don't have to be like, oh, I made a mistake. Now I'm going to the eraser. You can use the eraser as a tool. So if you wanted to erase out parts of an image or something, you can use the eraser almost as its own brush and that sort of thing. Don't hesitate to do that. I think that it's a really helpful thing. And so we can go in and we can clean up these edges and basically do what I was doing before, but this time I'm erasing it out instead of putting it in. And so that's an option for you too. It's kind of a preference thing. You can even do both, which I will do here now because um, I didn't do these leaves. So I will just fill in those leaves really quickly. And oh, I went over the lines, but that's okay because now I can go back with my eraser and I could just erase those bits out and we'll be in good shape. So I will finish that up and I'm going to need to change the size of the eraser real quick to get into these detailed areas. But then we will have the entire character filled in. As you can see, it's pretty cleanly filled in for the most part, and we're in good shape. So that's step one. Now, as I said before, I don't want her to be blue. That's why I started with blue, because I knew that that was a color that I did not want to choose. I'm going to start with the largest portion of color, and that for me would be her skin tone currently. There are going to essentially be three main uh, colors, probably. It might be two, it depends on how you look at it. But um, for this piece, you're going to have the skin tone be one color, or the whole, the skin area. You're going to have the hair be a secondary color. It could be multiple colors, but it's going to be a very large, bold element to this whole piece because she has a lot of hair. And then I would say that probably her top is going to be the third major color of this piece. Now, we want them all to work in harmony. We want them to be unified in a way that's pleasing to the audience, right? But we're not worried about that yet because first we need to start somewhere, and we started with blue, and so now we have to change that blue. So I'm going to change that blue to showcase the skin tone that I want to use for this piece. And the way that I do that personally is I go up to hue, saturation, brightness under adjustments. And up there in that menu, I have this hue slider, which then we can move around as much as we want. And we're working essentially non-destructively, which means that we can just go back if we need to, right? We're not just slapping down paint on top and then there's no undo button. We have an undo button, so we don't have to worry here. And again, if tension is a part of your process and you want to eliminate that a little more, like I do, this is a nice way to work because it allows and be like, everything's okay. Hey, Carlos Rupert just subscribed. Thanks, Carlos. Glad you're enjoying the video. Okay, so what we can do from here, now that she's blue and I don't want to use blue, is I can play with this hue slider until she's a color, skin tone color that I want. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't choose blue or whatever color. Like I could make her purple if I wanted to. I just don't. I'm going from a slightly more realistic skin tone currently. So that means I'm going to go over here to the yellow to red range, and we're going to kind of look in there to pinks and things like that. Now, because I've picked this like middle tone of blue, it's changing the hue to be just as saturated and just as dark or light and things like that. So we're going to have to move over to the second slider now, which is saturation, and we're going to have to play with that. Do I want it to be slightly less saturated? Do I want it to be more saturated? I'm not sure. But what I can tell just by moving this is that her skin is going to be a little too dark right now. With this setup, it's just going to be a little too dark. So I'm going to automatically go all the way over to the third option, which is brightness, and I'm going to lighten it up just a little bit because I want your skin tone to be deep, but I don't necessarily want it to be quite as dark as it just was. So from there, then we can continue to kind of tweak the saturation slider, and we can decide, do we want to go really bold with this image, or do we want to go slightly more pastel-y and less saturated? Personally, I like bold colors, but I'm not great at them. So that's something I have to practice. I'm much more comfortable in the more pastel-y range. That's just, for me, it's easier to find colors that are harmonious in this more pastel range than it is to find it in the bold color range. But again, that's something I have to work on because I want to eventually work with bold colors. So I can't I can't just magically get that ability. I have to work with bold colors. Because we are currently working on more of a lecture and a sort of explanation and teaching moment, I'm going to stick with what's comfortable for me because it will be easier for me to show you what I'm talking about. But maybe later for another live stream, we can come back and play with this and be bold and really push some things. So I've dropped the saturation down a little bit. I've increased the brightness a little bit. And now I'm going to play with the hue again because um, that's kind of, that's this process. You're going to keep going back and forth. You're going to keep going between these sliders, and you're just going to play with things until you find this thing that you really like. This approach is very feeling, well, I don't say feeling based, it's very intuition based, right? It's instinctual. And so when you're trying to do it this way, you want to step back and you want to say, does this feel right to me? Is this what I'm hoping for? Is this the outcome that I'm looking for? And it's just a matter of playing around. It's a matter of exploration. And so there's nothing wrong with tweaking things to see, do I like this better or do I like this better? Well, I like this better. It's almost like if you've ever had an eye exam. I have glasses, so I have a lot of eye exams, but they put down lenses in front of your eyes and they say, you know, 1, 2, 1, 2, better, worse, A, B, that sort of thing, until they figure out exactly what makes things as crystal clear for you as you need them to be. So that's sort of what we're doing here, but with color. We're saying, is this better? Is this better? Do I like this? Do I like this? And it's okay to continue to go back and forth over and over again until you find something you really like. So now I'm bumping up the saturation because I thought it was getting a little too desaturated. Maybe I'll tweak the lightness a little bit. Tweaking the lightness makes me want to saturate it a little bit more. And now we're getting to this kind of peachy orangish tone that I really kind of dig. Now, is this super realistic? No, probably not. I mean, it leans more toward realism than it does the blue that we had, but this is probably not the color that I would have picked if I would have tried to start with this color, right? And so that's where I think this method really excels. Because you can tweak things, you'll find colors you would have never chosen before because you're like, oh, I kind of like that. And so I'm going to stop there and we're going to just continue forward with this color. But if we go up to this color picker, what you will see is that I have moved to this sort of reddish orangish tone, and I've kind of gone into this area of uh, oh, why is that? Hang on. That is incorrect. Okay, let's pick that color. Come on there, iPad. There we go. Okay, so what we have here, well, actually, we've gone into a very bright orange, not this reddish tone, and we've gone high into the brightness of that orange tone. Now, if I was just picking a quote unquote skin tone color to start with instead of that blue, what I probably would have done instead of this extremely peachy bright tone is I would have tried to play it safe. I would have gone more towards the yellow range and I'd have gone more towards this grayish, brightish tone, but not all the way to the top. That's too bright. That's scary. So I would have probably started somewhere around here. That's the big difference between what I would have picked if I had just picked a color versus what I would have chosen by using this method of playing and exploration using the hue, saturation, and brightness tones. So if I were to color her in here, I mean, she's kind of turning into a statue almost. Like this is not as appealing of a color. It's it's okay. It's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't have this boldness that I now have because I tried it a different way. So I think that in that sense, it could be very useful. We've got a bunch of folks saying hi, everybody over in the chat. Again, feel free to ask questions as I'm going, but we also will have a Q&A at the end of today's live stream. So whatever works for you. All right, so let me get right. So hopefully you can see there the difference between the color I would have chosen. It's much more timid. It's much, it's just duller than the color I picked because I was trying something different and I was just exploring. So, all right, if we say that's good, I like that as a skin tone. Now we have a couple different options here. So we're going to do what I normally would do here. I'm going to create a new layer and then let's get rid of that one for a second. Then I'm going to pick a color for her hair, and I'm going to do it in a very similar way. I don't want her hair to be green. So I'm going to grab probably what is a rather garish green, and I'm going to go in on my new layer, and I'm just going to block in her hair. Now here, it's going to be a lot trickier, so I'm going to have to use that method that I used before using the eraser. I can go around the outside and do that. And here I'm not even going to use the fill tool because it was already almost done. So by the time I would have gotten up there and used the fill tool, it would have uh, taken me longer. So I'm just filling in by hand um, the whole thing instead of doing the outline and then fill. And again, this for me is just, this is pleasant. Like I like doing this. And so it's almost like a break for me from the rest of the work. So I'm having fun. I'm just enjoying filling in this hair. It's like a coloring book. And what I found as I've, grown as an artist is I need those moments where it's okay to slow down and just be like, yeah, I'm going to have some fun here. I'm just going to enjoy myself. I'm going to do my coloring and it's okay. So you'll have to bear with me because I'm just going to enjoy myself for a moment while I'm coloring this in. And I'm not going to go fast. I'm just going to have some fun. Okay, so got this little hair strand and we've got this hair strand. Now, this is kind of messy. There are a lot of places where I've gone outside the lines and stuff. So in a few places, I'm going to clean that up, but I'm not going to clean it up everywhere because firstly, this is a demonstration. And secondly, it's okay to have things be a little messy at times. It really is. Sometimes we get so caught up in being perfect that we forget. I mean, it's what's the famous quote? Happy little accidents, right? Like, just it's okay. You can go outside the line sometimes. No worries, especially if you're just doing a project to experiment, to play, to practice that sort of stuff. All right. So here I have her with this bright green hair. I do not think this color scheme works well. It's not supposed to work well. That's kind of why I picked it. But now we have to make it work well. So what do? We go back to our sliders and we start playing with stuff and we see where we want to go with it. I could keep it green and try and make this particular green work somehow. Like what would I have to do to tweak this to make this green work? Well, maybe I would go a little more blue. Maybe I would go a little more yellow. I think the yellow probably works a little more. Maybe I would change the saturation a bit. I might brighten it or darken it. But I could play with this so that it's not quite so garish. I still don't want her to have green hair, so I'm not going to do that. But I could do that. Let's move these back into the middle-ish area. Excuse me. And now we'll play with it and see what color we do want to make her hair. In my mind, initially, I was going with a deep color. Excuse me, I'm gonna drink. I was going with a deep color. This is a character who would, I think, be from Hawaii, hence the plumeria in her hair with the leaves. And that was kind of the direction I was headed. That was the reference that I got. So I was thinking something deep in terms of hair color. But You will note that I only have bold colors here, right? Like if I move the slider, no matter where I move, I'm just getting bold colors. And that brings us to another topic related to art, and color specifically. There are, if we go over to our gray on our colors here, hang on, let me up that. Okay. If we go over to our gray, this would be what we would call just a plain gray, medium gray. There's nothing inherently wrong with this medium gray, but it's kind of boring in a sense. And what we could do is we could change that. We can either make it a warm gray or we can make it a cool gray. And this is what you learn in color theory. We're not going to get heavy into it, but if you want to just do a quick search for tutorials and videos on uh, warm and cool tones, you'll figure this stuff out very quickly. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move it over to this blue. As you see, if I move this and I'm all the way at the edge here, it doesn't change the color at all, the color that I have. But if we go a little bit outside of this edge of the color picker, so like if I move over here a little bit, now it's going to change the color. And if I put this next to it, hopefully you can see, let me make it a little more dramatic so that you can really tell what's happening. You could see that this new gray is a little more blue, right? It's still gray, like it's this slate gray, but it's much more blue. And so then if I go over here, I can go into my reds and I could do the same thing. I could take that same gray, it's medium gray, but now it's more of a red tone. And so this is where color starts to be incorporated with grays or darker shades and things like that. And the same holds true if we go up and down on the color picker. If we go down here, we get a very dark color, but it's more of a reddish tone still. And if we go up here, this is where it gets most dramatic because now we see less gray and now it's much more pink, right? And so then again, if we go to this blue, if we come up here, we get a grayish blue, but it's definitely blue. And if we go down towards the bottom, we will get a very deep color, but it's still a different color than this one down here. Again, I'm not sure if you can see it on your screen. Yeah, should be able to see it on your screen. You have this deep blue gray instead of a deep red gray. So all that being said, these are the things you need to keep in mind. As we go forward and I do the hair here, I need to determine, do I want the hair to be more of a red gray or a deep red, or do I want it to be more of a deep blue and that sort of thing? Now, because we already have a color on the screen, it needs to work with that color. But I can always go back and change your skin tone. So if I find a hair color that I really love, it doesn't mean that I can't go back to the skin tone and change it slightly. You can always keep changing stuff around. Don't feel like you're like locked into a box at any given moment. And I think that that's a very useful tip because sometimes we can feel that way. My light here for some reason is going a little bit crazy and just changing color temperatures, but whatever. Okay. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Huh. Anyway, uh, so let's go back to the hair and we need to figure out the color of the hair. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop the saturation down to get it more into the gray range, and then I'm going to drop the brightness down. I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to play with the hues. And I'm going to see, do I want it to, again, be more of a blue or do I want it to be more in the red range? And that's the sort of thing we'll have to determine. Now, I have this propensity, apparently, for purple haired characters. It seems like this is just something I've learned as I've been working for the past couple months on changing my art style. I like default to purple hair. I don't know why. I do not like purple hair in the real world. It's fine. I mean, if that floats your boat, go for it. But for me, I just it doesn't appeal to me at all. I just don't. I don't care for it. But when it comes to characters, for some reason, purple uh, really works for me. Given that I know that about myself, I'm going to avoid purple for this piece because I want to do something a little bit different. So I might move over more to the blues, which will at least get me away from the purple that I had. And now I have, more, do I want this more greenish blue or do I want this more purplish blue? But I don't want to stick to purple, so I can't go too far that direction. So I think I like this kind of more navy-ish blue, but I'm not sure that it 100% works with the skin tone. So I have two options now. I can either change this so that hopefully it works better with the skin tone, and I would probably do that by increasing the saturation and brightness a little bit more toward this. So we go from this to this, which I think it changes the piece, right? But I think that it changes it in the right direction because it blends better with this skin tone. Or I can keep this one and I can go back to my layer with skin tone and I can play with that more until I find something that is more appealing to this blue. And there's no right or wrong answer there. I'm just kind of deciding which way I want to go, right? But this is the cool and also tricky thing about color. You could constantly do this. You could just spend hours and hours just tweaking tiny little bits to see what you come up with and what you like. And it's tricky and it's a trip. So I'm gonna just stick with changing the skin tone for now, and I'm going to. It's interesting because on the monitor, which I have the screen, um, I have the iPad streaming to the screen on the monitor. It's actually different than the iPad itself. So I'm looking down here and I'm finding colors that I really like, but then I look up at the monitor and I'm like, oh, that's different for the people who are seeing this. So apologies if your monitor is different than mine. That's the color calibrations might be different. You might be seeing a different image than I am, but hopefully it's not too far off. Okay, so I kind of like this. I like this combination. This works for me for this character. It's a little bit heavy on the blue on the hair, which is taking it more in a little bit more of a fantasy direction than I wanted, but that's okay. I think we can live with it and we can deal with it. And we're happy. So let's keep that. Let's keep that. And let me do a quick time check. We're at 41 minutes already. Wow. We're like nowhere. No, I mean, we've gotten far. We've already picked our first two colors, and that's really important because now we have two things that everything else needs to work with. And soon we'll have three things, and then we'll have four things, and we'll just keep adding these layers until eventually we have a fully completed image. Now, we're not going to get to the fully completed image today. I can tell you that much. 41 minutes in, we're only this far. So we're going to kind of move along here, but there are a couple little quick tips and tricks that I want to share with you before we get out of there. First of all, you may note that there is some subtle shading on this piece already. If you look down here, let me grab a different color and do a different layer. If you look down here under her chin, she's got this shadow, right? That shadow was in the original uh, line art and sketch. It's a lower opacity and it's on top. So um, when we put everything together here, we're getting some shading already. And what's nice about this is that you can choose from the things that you already have. So if I want to add more shading to different areas for her, I could just color pick this spot and I know that it already works with uh, everything around it. Like I am aware, and so then I can use it to kind of uh, do my shading and I can build the colors based on what I already have. However, that being said, the lines here are gray or are they're kind of a purple, but they're mostly gray, right? So if we zoom in, these lines are technically in this pinkish purple range, but they're a lot more gray than they are anything else, which means that this shading here is going to be a grayish tone. And grayish tones tend to flatten images out. They tend to be less appealing. So while I could go to this and just use this color straight out, what I might want to do is go in and start changing it to be uh, a little bit more saturated, a little bit brighter, a little bit richer. And I can also change the sliders here so that I can go a little more towards red or gray or things like that. And I'll keep playing around and eventually that was weird. It just kicked out on me. Something's up with the technology today. My apologies if things are cutting in and out or anything. That was weird. Okay. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. Uh, you can change the colors that are on there subtly to make them more appealing and more interesting visually. So, just by tweaking some things, I've gone from this color to this color, and it's going to end up probably being a lot better for uh, my shading, my tones. Now, this one might be a little too red, and that's okay because we can go in using the method that we've just explained here, and we can tweak things, right? But this is going to give it more life. It's going to give it more interest than this more grayish tone that we had before. The grayish tone is going to flatten things out. So while you're working with color, don't be afraid to push it a little bit more towards more saturated and brighter instead of the grays. And I shouldn't necessarily say brighter. Just take it away from the grays. Give it a little more color, give it a little more pop, and you're going to find your images are just much more appealing. And it's a nicer way to work and that sort of thing. So I would have this color, and I could go in and start in on my shading and things like that, and I could put it in the places that I need to put it and begin that process. But for now, you can. That will probably be a future live stream rather than this current one because it's kind of going a little off topic to my color, and that's more on shading, which we'll get to in a future one. Okay, last thing that I wanted to mention, and then we will move on to the next part of the lecture, and then we'll get to our analysis because that's probably going to take a little while too. You may have come across this tip before, but it bears worth repeating. When you are doing a character's eyes, specifically the quote unquote whites of their eyes, it really pays to not use white. And what I mean by that is if you go to the color picker and you go all the way to the corner, this would be a pure white that you can make the eyes of your character. Now, can you do this? Yes, absolutely. If you want to do that, you go for it. It will give you a very particular look. It may be what you're after. And that's totally cool if that's what you want to do. However, it will be the problem with using pure white or pure black for that matter is that you have nowhere else to go. Like there's nothing beyond that. You've gotten as bright as you're going to get, or you've gotten as dark as you're going to get. There is a C.S. Lewis quote that I love. It says, "Don't use the word infinitely when you really mean very." Right? If you mean something is very whatever, don't use the word infinitely. Otherwise, when it comes time to talk about something that is truly infinite, you won't have any words to use because it's just gone away. And the same thing holds true for whites and blacks in an image. If you use a pure white, then you've essentially gone as far as you can go. And you'll never be able to make something pop any more than that because that contrast is going to be as high as you can make it. So instead, when you're working on something like the whites of the eyes, what is generally recommended is you choose the skin tone color, then go to your color picker and then choose a slightly lighter version of that color and then use that as your white, because what will happen is that it will read as white when you zoom out. So initially it may not. Initially it would be like, wow, you're just clearly painting with a lighter skin tone. But watch what happens when we finish up and then zoom out. When we zoom out here, suddenly those eyes read as more white than they did when we were really zoomed in. But this is the color right here that we used. It's not white. And that's because color is extremely relative. Whatever's around it changes that color. And you may see a lot of things related to that online. It's really good to know about that. And that's another reason that I like this method of changing saturation and hue after the fact, because then you can see the color next to the other color and see how it plays. And you're going to pick colors that are different than if you just pick them in quote unquote a vacuum, right? If you were just choosing colors without thinking of any other colors, it's going to be very different than if you have them next to each other. So in this instance, it's really helpful to make the white of the eyes not quite white. Now I went kind of extreme here with this tannish color. You could get very much close to white and still not have it be white. So like this is even brighter and you might like this more, and that's totally cool. You can do that, but it's still not white, right? Look at where we are on the color picker. We're still not at exact white. And the nice thing about this is after the fact, you can go in, let me just grab a different brush. You can go in and you can make your highlights actually white. And if you have those highlights go over top of uh, the white part of the eye, then they pop still. And so that's one of those places that it does pay to use a pure white, or in some instances you will want to use a pure black. But if you use that too much, then it never again, it's like that infinite thing. Once you've used that word, you can't go above it. Once you use that color, you can't go anything beyond it. So that's a really good tip. I'm going to leave the colors of the eyes this more uh, tan, pale. And when I do that, you can see that it'll pop even more when we use the white, which is really nice. So see, this just really dramatically makes the image feel different than if we had used straight up white. The highlight wouldn't have popped as much. And this is a really nice way to get an extra bit of life into your illustrations, into your characters, to use that in that way. Okay, is there anything else we're going to talk about? Oh, one more thing specifically related to digital art that we'll talk about, and that's our um, effects for a second. So if I go in and what I want to do, let's do her blush because that'll work well. If I go in and I add, say, some blush around her face here, um, and I'm just doing this roughly, so forgive me if it's hideous, but that's okay because we're just doing things roughly here. We can, using digital art, change our layer modes. So we have things like darken and multiply and color burn and all sorts of things. This is another area where you get to experiment. You can go ahead and add something, and then you can go through this long list of different effects, and you can see if any of them work well or don't work well, or you like or you don't like, and you can play with stuff. And you can always go back to normal if you want to get back to where you were. But this is another opportunity for you to play with things. So let's say that I go in and when I got to hue here, I kind of liked hue. This doesn't work exactly right, but it changes things and it's giving me another set of colors to work with. After you've changed that to a different layer mode, you can still go into hue, saturation, and brightness and change it from there. So you have yet another place to play with and to change things. And so you can go in and you can continue to tweak things and mess with things and see what happens and play and have fun. And it will act very differently than if you had just put down that color without the layer mode. And so this is sort of another opportunity for you to change things. And then as always, you can go back and you can change your opacity too. You can just play and play and play and keep changing things and keep experimenting with color. And that's, if there's no other takeaway from today's lecture, I hope that's a big one. Play with color. Play. Have some fun. It's okay if it fails. Nothing is really lost. I mean, it's no big deal. You just move on to the next piece. You don't have to stress. You don't have to freak out about it. Color can be fun. It doesn't have to just be work. It can be work too. It usually is. But you can just enjoy the experience a little bit more. So if you're too tense with color or if you don't know where to start, try this method. Try just playing. Try experimenting. I think that it'll open up whole new worlds to you, and you'll start to you'll start to be a little more brave with your color choices initially instead of being like, oh, I gotta be careful. I gotta keep things super realistic and stuff like that. So that's this first part of the lecture. I hope that it was useful, and we're going to move along here really quickly and talk about one more thing when it comes to color, and that is color picking. So what we have here is an existing character illustration, and it's got some really nice colors to it. There are two ways that we can analyze these colors. We could, in Procreate, you hold down your finger on the image, and you can pick colors this way. You get this little pop-up, and it allows you to pick colors, and then it chooses that color for you, and then you can paint with that color. The other way is what we would call picking by eye. And the way picking by eye works is you keep your reference there on the screen, and you go up to your color picker and you try and pick a color from the piece by eye, not with the color picker tool. One of the really nice things about this is that it will train you to have a better eye for color over time. At the same time, let me warn you in advance, this will be extremely frustrating at first, or probably will be extremely frustrating at first. I can't promise that it will be because maybe you're just great at it, but it is not that case for me. This is hard for me, and it's still hard for me, even though I continually practice it. It's getting easier, but it's still hard. So, what I mean by that is let's just, for example, take her skin tone. Okay, the skin tone of this character we're going to pick by eye. I'm not going to use the color picker right now. I'm just going to pick it by eye. So I'm going to drag the slider around until I get a general feel of where she is. So to me, this is a very orangish yellow color. But it's got some red in it. So I'm going to stop here along this slider. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to try and figure out where it is in terms of saturation and brightness. This is pretty bold. So we're probably going to need to go closer to the right side of the color picker. Now the question is, do I think that this matches? And as I flick my eyes back and forth, that's what's happening here. I'm looking back and forth between my color picker up in the right-hand corner to see what I'm looking at and the image that I have as my reference. No, I go flip back and forth and I say, do I think that that is correct? No, I think this is too orange. And I think that there's a peachier tone to her. So I'm going to move this slider back a little more towards red. And that's going to allow me to get a little peachier. Now, I think it might be a little bit too dark. So I'm going to move up and over a little bit. And let's stop there for a second. Do I think this is correct? I think this might be a little too bright. So let's move it down and over a smidge. Okay. I think that this is close. I don't think I've got it spot on, but I think it's close. I think this is close to her skin tone color. There's only one really way to check, right? And that is to go in and see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, yep, I think that's it. That's my guess. And I'm going to take that color and I'm going to paint over her the area that I was looking at. Okay. So what we have here now is we see the color I picked compared to the color that actually was. And if we zoom in here, you can see that there is a pretty substantial difference. Now, I feel like for me, I got pretty close. I got closer than sometimes I get, or at least I used to get in the past. So I'm pleased with myself that I at least got reasonably in the right range, but it's still not quite right. So instead of just being like, well, too bad for me, what I will now do is I'll go back to the color picker and try and fix what I just did and pick better. So what did I determine with when doing the paint over? I determined that I was too dark in my guess. So initially what we're going to do is we're going to brighten it up. I was also, was I far off in hue? I might not have been far off in hue. I might have only been off in brightness. So I'm going to take a second guess. I just moved this up a tiny amount, but I'm going to take a second guess now. And so I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, this is my second guess. Let's see what happened. Okay. So now we've gotten a little bit closer, right? We're a little closer to this color, but it's still not quite right. So what did I learn from the second attempt? Well, first of all, I'm a little too saturated, I think. So I'm going to move over to desaturate a smidge. And I might need to move away from the orange a little bit in maybe a little more red. I'm not exactly sure, but let's try a little more red. And so this is going to be guess 3 for me. And then I will go in and I will do the same thing. I'll paint. Hey ho, look at that. I'm getting very close. Look at that. We are now very close to the actual skin color. And so now I'm pleased because via analysis, I have gone in and started training my eye better. And I've programmed my brain a little bit more to be more receptive to colors and that sort of thing. Now, again, when you begin this process, it may be extremely difficult and you may be way off. Like you might pick a color and paint over and be like, what was I thinking? That's nothing like it. I feel terrible. Like at least that's it for me. Sometimes I just feel bad about how far I've failed initially. But stick with it. I promise you it will get better. It truly will get better. Okay. So I've gotten this far and hang on, my hands are getting slippery, so my iPad is reacting less to me. Okay, I've gotten this far. I'm pretty pleased with how close I've gotten. At this point, I could just keep doing it until I'm basically perfect. But instead, what I'll do is I will color pick my last guess, which is here. And then I will color pick the area that I was trying to get to, which is here. Okay, so these are the two colors that we wound up with, my guess and the actual. And now what I can do is I can open my color picker and I can just choose between these two over and over again like this to see where I was off and what I got wrong, essentially. Okay. So if I pick here, this was the color that I guessed. We see that I'm, a little more. And if we go back to the other one, this dot is moving slightly over and up, to the left and up from my guess. So my guess was here, and the other one was slightly to the left and up. So it was slightly desaturated from my attempt, and it was slightly brighter than my attempt. But I mean slightly, right? It's slightly. And that's what I'm talking about when I said earlier, sometimes the difference is millimeters. It's so small, but it makes a difference. It really, really does. It's going to change the overall feel because every time you change a color a little bit, every other color is going to change a little bit. And you might be okay with leaving them. It still might be unified and harmonious, but it can be just a tiny little thing. Okay, so the point of this exercise, hopefully you understand, is to train your eye to just visually kind of grasp colors and figure that out. Now, in this instance, I picked a character on purpose that had a flat tone on the skin. Like most of the things in this image, if we zoom in here, yes, we have pretty much exclusively flat color on this image. So there's a little bit of a gradient, I think, on the eyeball itself, but otherwise this is pretty flat colors. And so it's going to be easier for you to eyeball, color choose, and practice on something flat like this. However, that being said, clear that, you can do the same exercise via a photograph or something that has a lot of shading and something that has a lot of gradient to it. So in this instance, if we had this photograph, which is of sand dunes, some people hiking along some sand dunes, there are a lot of different oranges and peaches and grays and colors in just that one sand dune. It's not just a flat color like it was for the skin tone of that character. And so this gets kind of the next level of exercise you can do because you need to look at that whole range of colors and get an idea of what you would pick to try and summarize the whole thing. Or you can pick one specific area. So for example, in this area we have, well, let me change to not sand colored. In this area we have kind of this peachy, pinkish color. Whereas down here we have a much more orange, this burnt orange kind of color. And that's not even talking about the shadows. This is just within the actual piece itself. Then if you look right here, we have almost this purple color. if we zoom in, we have this deep grayish purple color. And so there's a lot of different colors in this one image. But if we wanted to try and eyeball color pick something from this, we could go up and we could say, all right, well, it's definitely this orange tone, and it definitely seems like this reddish orange tone, right? And we're pretty saturated and pretty bright and bold. And I think we could go a little more orange maybe, and then I think it's still bold, much more bold. Okay, so then we might take this color and we might just paint ourselves the shape of this part of the sand dune, right? And so what I was trying to do was color pick to that part of the sand dune. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of colors in that part of the sand dune, but I can just from here kind of determine, did I get close? Did I get close to the feel of that entire sand dune? And for me, I would say, no, I didn't quite get there, because for me, I went a little too burnt and too orange. I was focused on that depth of color instead of the brightness of the color. So what I can do then is play with the first idea that we talked about today, and I can go in and change the saturation and the hue and the brightness and things, and I can see if I can nail down that color a little bit more compared to what I want it to be, which is gonna be tricky because it's so subtle and there's a lot of colors in there. But I think this probably suits it better. Uh, this to me represents that a little bit better than the first thing that I chose. Now, I'm not sure I like this color. It's not like I'm going to use this color to paint with, but again, uh, as an exercise, this is a really nice thing to do. And we can do the same thing with the sky. Um, we can go into our blues and we can try and figure out, where is this sky? Now, the sky has a gradient because it's got some clouds in it, and all skies tend to have some gradient to them. So we have to decide, am I looking at the top part? Am I looking at the bottom part? Am I trying to unify them in my own brain to get an idea of where this might be? And so we can play with that and get an idea of, what it is that we want to use as that blue, and then we can paint that in as well and see kind of how close we came. uh, and now this is feeling similar to our image that we're color picking from, but it's also feeling in a sense different, and the reason it's feeling different is because of those clouds. Those clouds are changing things pretty dramatically. So what we can do, and then we'll wrap that part up. I won't go into a full painting on this. We can go in and we can try and grab some color that represents those clouds well. We know in our brains that clouds are white, so we might want to jump straight to white, but they're not white in that image, which we'll see in a second when I color pick them directly. They are not white in that image, so we might go somewhere in this neighborhood. That might be too bright. Let's try that. And we might go in and I might paint those clouds in. I'm not going for accuracy here. I'm trying to get an idea of if I got my colors right. So we might paint those in and see if we're close when it comes to the colors of that, right? So hopefully this gives you an idea. And so then if we go in and we start picking some colors from the actual piece, because you can always do that. This is what hang on, let me get my blocking brush so it's accurate. This is what we have in one spot on the clouds. This is what we have on another spot in the clouds. This is what we have on this spot of the clouds, which is very similar to that, but still different. And so we have all these different ranges in here on the clouds. Even here it gets closer to that. All these different ranges in the clouds. But as an exercise, we're trying to just pick general feel of all of them together, and then we can go in and layer and tweak and change and do things like that. So let's close those. And then finally, I pulled this piece up because I really like it. I want to talk for just a second about this piece. I was going to do some more eyeball color picking, but we're going to skip that because we're already running into an hour and 8 minutes of the stream. What I wanted to note about this piece, other than it's beautifully colored and this appeals to me greatly. Firstly, there is a gradient in her hair that is extremely subtle, but it is there. And so that's something that we can look at. I'm going to just color pick for now instead of doing it. Okay. So we have at the top part of her hair this color. And then if we move down, we have this color. And then if we go down here, we have this color. Now, these are not far off from one another. And her whole head reads as this sort of reddish orange, this very lovely color that appeals to me tremendously, at least. I don't know about anybody else. But even within that reading is all orange, we have these differentiations. And so this is something that you can add into your work that's very subtle, but will make a dramatic difference. If you're used to working more in flat color, give these very subtle gradients a try, this subtle shading, because it will add this depth to your piece that you will not get with just flat color. Sometimes it's nice to just use flat color, but it's going to be different than if you use something like this. The last thing I want to talk about today in this portion, and then we'll move on to some analysis, which we've already started doing a little bit of, is look at the highlights on this character. First of all, the highlight here on the top of her head is white. I mean, it's just pure white. You can't even see me drawing it because it's just straight up white. And that has a nice effect because they haven't used bright white anywhere else. Like it's been saved for this harsh highlight on her hair. But there is also this yellow that they used for the lighting. And you can see that in different areas, like here on this strand, there's this yellow. And here we get into a very, that was slightly over top. Here we get into this very rich yellow. And then here at the top, we also have this very rich yellow. And so this artist has put in these yellowish tones along with the white. The white was reserved for just a few spots, but then they've used this yellowish tone to indicate the light too. And so that that sense of brightness comes through in a color instead of just white or a darker tone. Ala says the gradient looks very smooth. Yeah, this is the gradient on her hair is so lovely and smooth that you barely notice it, which is what kind of I'm trying to convey here. You can use color in such a subtle way that it's not maybe consciously noticeable until you start color picking, and then you're like, oh my gosh, that was way different. Because the difference between, oh, let me grab a darker tone. The difference between that color and that color is significant. It's not, it's not necessarily a small change there. It's pretty drastically different. But because it's so smooth and it's so it's such a nice transition, you don't feel like it's dramatic or harsh. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't do it in a dramatic or harsh way. I don't know if I'll be able to just, well, let's just do a quick paint over sort of thing. If I grabbed this and made this part of her hair that color, and then I grabbed the lightest part and made this part that color, you could still do it this way. It'll change the feel a lot. But this would be a more dramatic. If you're familiar with the stream we did on chunkiness and form, I'll try and post a link in the description of the recording of this video, so you can check that out later. But our chunkiness and form lecture and analysis, it dealt with harsher edges like this. Like this makes it feel chunkier, right? We have this shadow, but it feels like more of a form than it does if we hide that layer and we have this beautiful smooth gradient. So you get a very dramatic, different effect. And which you choose is up to you as the artist and what you're going for. But that's just something to keep in mind. Keep that sort of thing in mind because I think that it's very helpful. And so if we could wrap up today's lecture portion of the live stream, I would say, firstly, remember that colors differentiation can be very subtle and can make a big difference. If you're nervous about color, then do some experimentation, do some play. Know that it's going to flop some of the time. You're going to create color palettes that you scratch your head and you're like, that's hideous. I don't even know how to fix it. What do I do? It's okay, especially when you're starting out with color. That stuff happens. As you go, you will learn more, you'll get better. Um, but just experiment a bit. Try that method where you're playing around with the hue, saturation, and brightness. And I really think that there is something to be said for this idea of starting with a color you don't want to use, because it will get something on the screen and then you'll be so interested in fixing it that you won't have that tension of I have to pick the perfect color the first time, right? Don't feel like you have to pick it the first time. You don't. Even the old masters who worked in actual paints would paint over their paint because they weren't getting the right thing that they wanted. They would go back to the palette, back and forth until they got what they were looking for. And now that we have digital tools, we can do the same thing slightly differently, but it's a similar sort of idea. All right. Before we jump into the analysis portion, I want to talk about one thing, and that is using color palettes that already exist, because that's the thing. So there are a couple different ways that we can look at that. I will make the screen bigger for a second while we're talking about that. Okay. So you can go online now and you can go to different websites that will essentially generate color palettes for you. And I don't think that there's necessarily anything inherently wrong with doing that. I do think that you have to be careful that it doesn't become a crutch or that you're not hindering your own progress by using pre-existing color palettes. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be cautious when you do it, because if you are always reliant on something else for your art, then there's a certain level of skill you're not going to develop because you're too busy relying on that thing. It's the difference between like, so say if you broke your leg, you would walk around on crutches. Like you have to, because you can't walk on your own power right now. But if your leg healed and you just kept the crutches all the time, that's not good for you. Like the purpose of the crutch is to get you to healed, to get you to being better. Now, it doesn't mean that some people aren't going to always have to use the crutch. Like if, that just might happen. But if you can, it's probably better to walk on your own two legs than it is to rely on the crutch forever. If you have to rely on the crutch, you do it. But just be careful that you're not doing it because you have to. You're doing it because you have to do it, not because it's just easier. You just have to be careful of that. Last thing I will say then is, what about using color palettes from existing work? Right? Because then we're not talking about just like an automatically generated color palette. We're talking about essentially stealing colors from an existing piece. What do we do in that case? I would say that that falls into a realm that's very similar to fan art. There's nothing wrong with doing fan art until you start trying to pass it off as something you created yourself, right? Like that IP already exists, that creation already exists. I like to use Pokemon because there's a lot of Pokemon fan art. Pikachu already exists. You didn't create Pikachu. No matter how much great fan art you do of a very unique looking Pikachu, it's still Pikachu, and you didn't create that. So I think that fan art, just like color picking from an existing piece, is great for practice. It's great for fun, but don't sell it and don't do it and pass it off as your own. So, like, if you see a piece by somebody that you really like, don't go steal the color palette and be like, "Look how great I am at color." Uh, that's not cool. You don't want to be a thief. So use it to practice with. Draw inspiration from it by all means. That's art. That's what we do. We look at people who came before us and we say, "This is amazing. I want to be like that." So then we get influenced by it. But be very careful that you're not just flat out stealing it, because then we've crossed the line there. All right, that's all I'll say about that. Now we will jump back in and we will get to uh, the next portion, which is application and analysis. Now we already did a bunch of application here in the lecture portion that we usually wouldn't do, but we're going to jump into some analysis. Now, uh, again, I will reiterate once I find the thing that I am currently working to change my personal style after 30 years. So I've collected a bunch of pieces to analyze so that I can go towards a different direction. None of these pieces are exactly what I want to do. They're all different things that have elements of what I want to do. And so the process is that I'm going through to try and uh, figure out what it is, analyze what it is so that I can change my style into this direction that I want to go. Now, these are some of the different analyses that we've been doing and we're going to do, from line quality and female proportion and chunkiness and form. Those ones we've already gone through. You can see the whole playlist over at Animator Island TV. But you'll note here in the middle, if you can see, we have colors 1, colors 2, and colors 3. So there's a lot of things to analyze when it comes to color. And this is just the first 3, because honestly, I can fill another probably 10, if not more, with pieces that I found that have colors that I love and I would want to analyze. I've just started with 3. We're only going to tackle colors 1 today. So we're only going to dive into this first one today, and we're going to either talk about the other ones another time, or I will just do those on my own. But there's going to be a lot of color analysis from me because this is, again, an area that not only do I have to work hard on because I'm not used to it as much as, just flat out line art, but it's something that has never quite fully clicked for me. My art intuition in terms of color still needs developed. I I don't mean to sound braggy about it, but I have developed a pretty good eye for things like composition. That I feel like I need to practice less because composition is kind of my jam. Like I enjoy composition. I can look at that and say, well, this composition would be better if they changed this or the other thing. Color, on the other hand, I feel like almost an infant that I'm just still crawling around and figuring stuff out by poking things. So we're going to poke some things regarding these colors. But um, Alice has amazing colors, and I agree. These pieces have some amazing colors. They have some wonderful aspects to them, and we're going to kind of go through and we're going to talk about a few of them. We are at an hour and 20 minutes. I'm probably going to try and keep this part short, and then we'll do a quick Q&A. But let's dive in and talk about a few things. Okay, this first piece, I really like for a couple of reasons. But one of the things that jumps out to me personally is the way this artist has used very desaturated colors with very saturated colors. Now, in general, I'm always going to recommend you eye pick colors, like you pick them with your eye instead of using the actual color picker. I'm always going to suggest that because I think that it's going to do better things for you long term. It will be harder, but it will be better in my opinion. But because we're trying to analyze things, I'm going to directly color pick from these images so that we can talk about the colors that were chosen. HMT says, I can't look at my drawing for too long. I got eyes bleeding by my color picking, too red, too green. I wonder if there are any safe color areas. I'm a newbie. Okay, so it is true that the longer you look at an image, especially when it's on a screen, the more your brain is going to kind of adapt or move off of what it would be if you just looked at that quickly or you were just passing by, or even if it wasn't on a screen. When you say, I wonder if there are any safe color areas, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Do you mean in terms of not having that brain situation where the colors change because you've been staring at them too long? Or do you mean, is it like, are there any colors that are generally safe to use so that you don't have to think about which ones you pick. If you want to clarify it, let me know. But I will say this, the longer you look at a screen in general, the more your eyes are going to adapt and change a little bit so that it will be different. The other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, different monitors are going to show colors very differently. And print will show a color differently than it showed up on your monitor. So you just kind of gotta play with that and recognize that that's the case. To clarify the saturation. So yes, saturation in color is going to be probably the great hurdle that most of us have to deal with. When it comes to desaturated colors, it's going to be a lot easier to come up with more cohesive color palettes. And that's something that I'm finding myself for sure as I'm working. The bolder I go, the harder it is to get them to play nicely together because they're both fighting for attention. And so that's just something that's you're going to have to just keep developing. We're all going to have to keep developing because bold colors are tricky. They're trickier that's why one of the reasons I like working in more pastel-y colors palettes, because it's easier to come up with a scheme that works together and that you can nail more quickly. But with practice, with time, you can definitely improve that. What I would recommend to you specifically, HMT, is if you're finding that that if you look at something for too long, it starts to do that, try to, at least during the color phase, try to stop and start a little more. Go rest your eyes for a bit, go for a walk or something, come back. The other thing that has worked for artists for centuries is to kind of squint your eyes, to kind of relax your eyes. Relax your eyes, kind of squint slightly, and you'll be able to not take in quite so much. This is why if you've ever seen an artist like squinting or things like that, they're relaxing their eyes so that they can get an overall feel of things without worrying about the harsh details quite as much. And so that might be something that helps too. But I think that you'll build a sort of resistance as you go. You'll get better at it. You'll have less of that, what you're calling eye bleeding, I think, to your color picking as you go. But if you feel it coming on, just go rest for a bit. It's okay. Your art can take a while. I was watching, I don't even know what show it was. I was watching the show. Actually, I just passed through the room. My wife was watching the show, but they were talking about this one particular artist who in his lifetime was not very famous, but then after he died became very famous. And they said that he did 2 paintings a year in the most productive part of his life. 2 a year. So if you find that, you've been staring at an image too long and you want to get it done, keep that in the back of your mind. Some people only do 2 images a year and they're super famous now, or whatever the case might be. They've produced beautiful work. So don't feel like you have to rush. Don't feel like, oh, I've been here for 2 hours and my eyes hurt, but I got to finish. No, just put it aside for a bit. It's okay. Just take your time. Okay, sorry, I kind of diverted there for a bit, but I hope that helps a little bit with what you were talking about. All right, so going back to this image, I get a drink before I do that. Going back to this image, the artist has done a beautiful job blending bold colors with much more desaturated colors. I love this image. Was one of my favorite images of the bunch. It's not in my top 6, but it's definitely up there because boy, it's just such a beautiful image on so many levels. I'm going to try and stick to the color and not get caught up in all the other things that I find beautiful about this. But if we look at the colors, what we'll see, first of all, is that the background is this gray color, right? I need to find a place to actually, I can't draw over top. Hang on one second. I guess I have to use, I don't know if I should use white. Excuse me. Okay. Let me just temporarily make a little side palette so that we can talk about the colors. Okay, so this background color is this gray. And if we use the color picker here, what we'll see is that it's not actually all the way to the left on this color picker. There is room to go left on the color picker if we moved over, and that would be a pure gray, which is here. This artist has actually put a little bit of a red tone, just a tiny bit into that background gray, which is a beautiful, subtle thing that makes this piece better. And that's what I said, remember before about it being so subtle. This is a great example of that. This artist purposefully added a little bit of red to their background gray, and it makes the whole rest of the piece feel more cohesive, and it makes the whole composition just lovely to look at just because they added that tiny bit of red. And it's not something that everybody would do. It's certainly not something that an inexperienced artist would do. But this person knows what they're doing, and they've added that little bit of gray here, and that's great. I'm so enamored with their decision to do that because they've added that little bit of red. It's allowed them to put this sort of red tone throughout the piece in a really nice way. Now, I don't know if they started with that reddish gray, it's barely reddish gray, or if they started somewhere else. I also don't know if at the very end they didn't go back and tweak the whole image because remember how we talked about you could change the color balance, the color saturation and things of whatever your color you're working with. You can also go back at the very end and change the whole thing. And there are a lot of different options. There's not just hue, saturation, and brightness here. There's color balance. There's curves. You can add gradient maps now, which I've not really gotten into yet because that boggles my mind at times, and I haven't really gotten to play with it too much. But a lot of people use it and use it to great effect. Um, so there's a lot of ways you can go back in at the end and you can tweak things and you can play with stuff and you can get some things. Awesome Cloud says, I think the first step is to find a focal point. I think that having a focal point is a really great option. Definitely. You don't have to work that way, but I think that it is a great way to kind of get yourself started and get yourself in, and then you can keep playing around there. And Mayank subscribed. Thank you for subscribing. We appreciate it. We'll have more great content soon. Okay, so continuing along with this piece, what we have then, let's look at the skin tone next. The skin tone, which when we put against white is almost invisible. It's pretty hard to see when we've just color picked the skin tone, which is interesting because it doesn't necessarily read as pure white when we have it next to this warm gray and have these shadow colors. It feels very skin tone like, but boy, it's hardly skin tone like when you really color pick it and you zoom out or you put it against pure white. And if we look at the shadow, I think this is one of my most favorite parts of this piece. Most favorite? Just favorite. This is one of my favorite parts of this piece. Look at the shadow color versus the skin tone color. My gosh, is that dramatic when you just put them next to each other. But within the whole piece, because the color of the background, because of the color of the rest of the piece, because color is so relative, it doesn't feel nearly as harsh as when you just have those two colors sitting next to each other on a white background. And it feels right. It feels so right in this piece to have that color be the shadow color of her skin tone. It's just beautiful. And so, since we're doing this as an analysis for my future art style, let me talk for a second to myself about what I've just learned by doing this. I need to be more bold in my choices of shadow and light and stuff like that. I need to be bold because this piece is beautifully bold, but it's not like screaming at you in terms of color necessarily, especially the skin tone. It just feels right. But I would have never chosen these two colors myself, especially if I was just color picking them, or not color picking them, but choosing them from the color wheel or color palette. I wouldn't have picked these because I would be too nervous about doing it because that's bold. I mean, look at where this is. It's just, that is a very bold shadow, but it works. So I need to keep that in mind, that when I'm choosing my shadow and light colors, it's okay to be bold. Go for it. Like, just go for it. And again, I'm talking to myself here more than anybody else. I need to go for it more because I tend to just be a little too timid about it. Okay, good to know. I could probably spend all day on this piece because we could talk about the shirt and oh my gosh, look at this color. Look at this color of the shirt. It's just, I mean, it hits you in the face, but it works beautifully with the rest of the piece. Just so nice. And then if we look at this blue that's next to it, look at just these two next to each other. Like, that's harsh. Those are some harsh colors. To use those two next to each other takes some skill and takes some bravery, but they did it and it works in the whole piece because they kept it subtle in their use. If like um if her whole pants were blue, maybe, although I don't know, even that will probably work because it's just beautiful and they did such a good job. This is a really nice spot. I was trying to say if they used it more, it wouldn't work. No, it does. It still works. It's beautiful. They did a great job with this. But again, coming back to that, I have to remember that sometimes things are going to feel garish in isolation, but once you step back a smidge, it works really, really well. All right. Well, we could talk about this image and this bit forever. I do want to see the pants gray. So the background gray, which is here, and the pants gray, which is here. We go into the pinks for the pants, and we move a significant portion to the right. So that's good to know. It's really nice. It's really, really nice. The other thing, if we look at her hair, this is, I think, the darkest part. Yeah, I think that's the darkest part of her hair. And you can see, even though she has black hair, essentially, they didn't use black. There's still a significant gap between solid black and her hair. So keep that in mind. And then up here for the highlight on her hair, we have this brownish gray that's up there. I don't think that they changed the, whoops, I don't think they changed the, yeah, it's slightly redder and brighter, but still sticking with those grays for the highlight. Really nice. Okay, I could gibber about that piece all day long. So we're gonna move on because we're already coming up in an hour and a half, and we want to get to a little bit of a Q&A at the end if anybody has questions. Let's talk about this piece. This next one is I really like because again, this one doesn't shy away at all. This is just a beautiful boldness to this piece. It's very graphic. It's very intense, but it's got a really nice quality to it in terms of not being super flat. Like, they've done a nice job with the subtle shadows and they've done a nice job with the color scheme and things like that. It's just really, really pleasant. Most of this, I'm pretty sure, is flat color, but if you look at her face area, right, the cheeks have this gradient and the nose, but everything else is relatively flat in color. The hair might have a little bit of gradient to it, and there's some subtle gradients in the shadows, right? But it's not dramatic. Most of this is pretty flat in color, which is a nice thing to. Oh, Hailey's here. Hey, Hailey, welcome to the live stream. So a lot of this is flat in color, but it's got a nice boldness to it. It's got a nice depth quality to it. The shadow color here is really nice. I can't paint there, right? No. I'm gonna just have to keep moving a little box around so that we can. I didn't think about that part, but it's true. I'm gonna leave the box so that I can. Okay. So we have this background color that's this beautiful magenta, and then the shadow color here is this rich plum purple. And that's a really nice aspect of this piece, in my opinion. Eileen says there's a lot of Eileen says there's a lot of subtle cell shading, and yeah, there's a lot of subtle cell shading. That's hard to say in this piece, which is very nice. The artist could have gone bolder with the shading, but where they chose to put the boldest part of the shading was like underneath the character instead of on the character itself. And that lends a nice softness to the character while still separating her from the background pretty significantly. The last thing I'll say here is if we look at the color of the quote unquote white of her outfit, it's actually this yellow gray. So again, we talked about this earlier, not using solid white too much or very subtly if you use it. So that's something to think about. It clearly reads as white on her stomach and the inner part of her legs here, but it's not white. It's this yellowish gray color. We're pretty far off from solid white. I am interested if her eyes are actually white. I think they are, but let's check. Yeah. So this artist chose to use solid white for her for the white of her eyes, which we talked about earlier. You know, you can do, and it works here because that's the one part that draws you the most. Like that's the most contrast. It's got the brightest spot. So I'm not saying never use solid white. I'm just choose it wisely, which this artist has done. Okay, so that's that one. Delete that and move over here to this piece. I really enjoy so many aspects of this piece, especially with the coloring choices they did. One thing that I think is interesting to note here is their use of a lighter line in terms of color. So what I mean by that is if we look at the background here, and my iPad's just like, I don't want to work anymore. Sorry. When it's been going for a while, it starts to be finicky. So if we look at the background here, we've got this flame color that's that pink. We've got the background that's this more reddish tone. But um, look at the line color choice that they picked. It's lighter than what's inside of it. And that's something that is really nice to use subtly here and there. They have also used it um, in the drapery of her veil. They've gone with a lighter line, and so that contrasts nicely. And as opposed to say over here on her hair, where they went with what you would maybe consider normal, which is a darker outline to whatever's or the outfit and stuff, a darker outline to whatever color is inside of it. So this is an interesting thing to keep in mind, and for me to remember that you don't always have to go with a darker line color, because as we determined in the lecture and video on line quality, I do want to include line in my work. Like I don't want it to be lineless art, whatever I'm producing. But here we see it's good to remember that you don't have to necessarily go darker in color. Now, the last thing I'll say about this piece, because we're going to keep going, we've got a lot of pieces to go through, is the beautiful choice that they did, this artist, to have such drama, right, with the skin tone. Like it's a very dramatic skin tone. It's a very dramatic background color. If the artist had instead chosen to use, we'll go even back to this gray. If the artist had chosen to use not this bright red background, it would change the piece pretty dramatically. Let me just do that real quick so we can see how it changes the piece. It won't be perfect because I'm not going to go into every little nook and cranny, but here we go. So this piece is still lovely without the red background behind it. It's still a very well crafted piece. It's still very bold because they got these highlight colors that are a departure from this bluish green tone. But the whole piece overall feels very different if we do that versus if we take that away and we have this red that pops. pops everything else, adds just this cohesive quality to it. And so that's something that you just will keep in mind. I need to keep in mind that because a lot of times I choose a very subtle background, and so with these first two or these middle two, this is not the first one. The first one is more of a subtle background, but these two have very bold backgrounds, and so I'm going to have to experiment more with that because it's clearly an element that I really like. I appreciate the the powerful quality to the colors that a lot of these people are choosing. Now, this one we've seen before. I was in one of our other live streams. Again, I think I noted it a little bit there. What I really love about this is their boldness of choice to make the smoke pink and the background white, because they could have made the background pink and the smoke more of a white and gray tones, but they went for it and they gave you this element to the smoke that draws you in because it's unique and it's different. And so that's something that, as I'm talking through it, I need to keep in mind. We talked about curiosity in art. Colors lend itself to that curiosity. If you take something that is normally one color and you change it, you're going to get an instant boost in curiosity. So that's something I need to keep in mind, and I'll need to write in my notes later. All right. I can feel my voice starting to go. So we're going to cover these briefly, and then we'll do our quick Q&A. This piece of this dress, I really like in terms of the quality of almost the texture. This feels very watercolory, which I really appreciate. I don't necessarily think I'm going to be doing much in terms of watercolor, or I should say this. And Eiley mentioned white lines in the smoke. Let me go back there real quick and we'll look at that. Yes. Good call. So yes, there are some subtle white lines in the smoke to indicate the highlights and to break up the forms. And just by doing that, this artist has given us more dimension. If we took those subtle white lines out, the smoke would still be dimensional because of the shadow and the brighter spots, but it wouldn't have quite the same sneaky quality to it. So that's a really good point. Okay, so regarding the dress here, I don't think my default style will be more of like this watercolory texture, but I do like it, so I'd like to experiment with it at some point over the course of my explorations. But I'm drawn to it, I think, because it allows the colors to blend so nicely together and play with one another. You get these, like, look at this beautiful aquamarine that's kind of happening over here, right? Like, oh, there's just all these different blends and different colors, and it's lovely to see them all. It's almost like watercolor lends itself to this idea of I can make any color play nicely together because they're blending together and they're just dancing almost, right? And so I really like this piece for that reason, that it just has all these different elements that are that just kind of blend together and that sort of thing. So that's kind of one of the things I really like about this piece. This artist, who is from Spain, I believe, you may have seen their work. It's getting more and more popular for good reason, because it's lovely and so creative. This artist does a great job with creativity. And basically, how do I put this? This artist manages to use a lot of contrasting colors in a beautiful way. They tend to let me say this. I've seen how this artist works, and a lot of it is intuition, I think, because he tends to just put down colors that work together, and like, he doesn't have to tweak a lot in terms of starting point, which is amazing. Like, it's beautiful to see the progress. But the other thing that this artist does really well, and we'll probably talk about this more in the lighting lecture and live stream that we do in the future, is this artist will do a lot of what you might consider post-processing. So they will have a really great image. It's already beautiful, already really well done. But then he'll go back on top and he'll do layers that make everything extra like pop and extra bold and extra great. Like it just takes it to a whole new level. And that is done at the very end. And so that's something else that I need to keep in mind. And that's useful for what it's useful that I know his process because that's something I probably wouldn't have come up with otherwise. I have to keep in mind as I'm working on my own style and things that you can always go back and add extra bits at the end. I have a tendency, again, this comes back to this timid aspect, especially when it comes to color. I don't have a lot of bravery in my color choices. And so when I find something that works, I'm so afraid, in a sense, of messing it up that I'm unwilling to just continue to play. And that's something that I need to keep in mind as I'm continuing myself. I need to keep in mind that I need to kind of get over it. I'm going to go off on a smidge of a tangent, but this might be helping my own process, and maybe it'll help somebody else. There is a manga called Hunter x Hunter or Hunter x Hunter, depending on how you pronounce it. But it's my favorite of all of them, of everything comic book wise that I've ever read. It's my favorite. And there's this one part, without getting too spoilery, because you should read it. There's one part where a character basically stabs themselves in the head with their fingernails and pulls out this little device. And they find out that all along they were kind of being subtly controlled by this other character. And so this character is like, oh my gosh, I feel so much freer now. Like this thing was holding me back the whole time. Um, and so there's something in my head that clicks with that moment for that character when it comes to things like color. I need to get that bit out of my head, this thing that's holding me back when it comes to color. I need to just like pull it out and be like, no, I'm done with that. I'm going to be bolder. I'm going to be braver almost with this color thing. It's a weird thing. Um, but it's true and it's in there. And so it's something I'm gonna have to keep in mind, this element of being bolder. Sorry, I'm this part, as you may know if you've come to the other live streams, this part is much more me sitting here thinking about stuff, whereas the lecture is much more practiced and solid. Okay. We're coming up on 2 hours, so I'm gonna finish up. We're just gonna run through these real quick. This piece I really like because of the difference, the hair color with the subtlety between the green and the yellow and the transition. I really love that. Uh, I could take or leave the skin tone. It's fine. The rest of it works lovely. It's just the thing that really draws me about this is that green and that yellow. Um, green especially is tricky to work with. So to do it well, when somebody does it well, it really draws me in. Um, Hailey says Hunter x Hunter is a fun one. And Togashi, the creator, also made Yu Yu Hashiko and is married to the creator Sailor Moon. Accurate. Little bit of a side note: take care of yourself. This artist really pushes that heavily. He will always say, "Take care of yourself as an artist," because what happened was he pushed himself so hard that he injured himself, and I think it's his back. He can't really sit and draw anymore. It's just too painful. That's why if you followed Hunter x Hunter at all, it's still ongoing as a series, but you get like one every 4 years, like a chapter every 4 years now, because he's in such pain. It's such a shame because he's an amazing creator, such a creative mind, and does some beautiful work. But he didn't take care of himself, so he always says that: take care of yourself, rest often, do exercises. Don't get put in that position that he was in. I wish that he would let go a little bit and let somebody else do the drawing for him almost. Like it's an option for him because it's very famous and I mean they have a lot of money. But I understand. You want to do it yourself. But if you can't, I really want the ending to that manga. Anyway, yeah, so take care of yourself. Don't it's easy to work, especially when you're younger, and just be working, working, working. Oh, I feel fine, everything's fine, but it'll catch up to you. Okay, if we look at this picture of Daisy, um, Daisy is my favorite Mario character, FYI. I don't know why. I love Daisy. Okay, so what I really like about this piece is that again, the artist really they were bold with their color choices. Like this is a bold piece, but it works very well, and I appreciate that. And I don't necessarily love the scratchiness to the line quality, but there's some aspect of it I like. So I guess what I would say is this: I like this style, this scratchy line, but it's not what I want for my style. I'd like to be able to do it one day, but it's not my default. That's not what I want for my default. We're talking about colors though. So in terms of colors, I really like the chunkiness and form again, that the color choices and the shapes that they used, and I like the just boldness that they went with. Hailey says all of these images have warm, saturated colors. That's a good call. Yeah, we're going to get into some cools soon, but yes, you're right that a lot of them definitely have more of a warmer tone to them. So that's something I need to keep in mind, and I appreciate you pointing that out. I appear to be drawn to warm tones. So let me jot that down so that I don't forget it. Let's put it here. Okay. I'll put that there so that I remember to put that into my notes. That's a really good call and not something that I caught. All right, we're going to move on to some cool tones after we just talked about that. But I will say this, the reason that I like this piece is less because of the cool tones. I actually am not a huge fan of the cool tones themselves, but I really like that Lois here went crazy with the colors. She's very good at that. She's very good at choosing bold and dynamic colors. Definitely worth checking out some of her art. Um, so here she went with a very cool palette, and I appreciate that uh, it's done in that way. But I really like that this is again we go back to that boldness. We keep coming back around to boldness, boldness, boldness. Other than that first one, which had bold elements, all of these have been very striking, which I will also jot down, because I think that's a good word that I'm going to need to remember. This striking color palette. Here again, we have this wonderful, subtle gradient. This one's less subtle because you can see that it dramatically changes from top to bottom, but the colors almost have that watercolor feel where they're just blending and playing together. They're dancing. It's just a really nice piece. I also, color aside, love the complexity of this piece. I don't think my work is going to end up being complex in a sense. Um, like in terms of a lot of tiny details, it might. I don't know yet. Uh, well, it might. I don't know. We'll have to figure that out. But anyway, I really like that this could have just been a two color gradient. They could have started in yellow and ended in orange, and it would have worked and it would have been a nice piece. But because they introduced this third element of green and they went through this whole spectrum, I think that it adds just another dimension to it, and it really adds that boldness. This is, as you remember from one of the other pieces, I'm pretty sure I let that out of the bag. This is one of my top six in terms of um, pieces that I have collected. This is in my masterpiece collection. I just love this piece so much because of its creativity, but because of its boldness in its subtlety. This one to me reminds me a lot of this first one, right? We've got very subtle aspects to a lot of it, and then we just go in with a boldness. The eyes of these characters that are so bright and so bold and vibrant just add such a delightfulness to the piece, and they've put it in an unexpected place. We talked about earlier that curiosity, color can boost curiosity instantly. This is a great example of that. If these characters did not have vibrant aquamarine glowing eyes, this whole piece changes. It's still a great piece. It's still lovely. I still want to know more about it, but the whole thing changes if you make their eyes just plain old brown or blue or something that doesn't just pop. If you take out that the boldness of this color that's throughout as an accent, if you take that out of this piece loses a lot. like a significant amount. It's still a great piece. It's still beautifully crafted. The quality is super high. The content is very cool. But take out that color and it's going to dramatically harm the piece in terms of overall, just everything about it. It would not be the same piece. So if there was a takeaway there, it would be firstly reiterating that fact that color can add to curiosity if you change the color of something to something that it shouldn't be, like something that is dramatically different than what you would expect, that unexpected element which is part of curiosity. But also the idea of an accent, the idea that you can go subtle with most of your piece and then you can just punch people in the face almost with this one particular accent. Eileen says yellows, teals, and reds everywhere. Yep, that's a good observation. And I think that sort of, again, we go back to sort of that warmth. Even the teals are going to be cool, but it's that beautiful contrast between that cool and that warm. Just really like that piece. One of my favorites. And then finally, we've last one, and then we'll do a quick Q&A and we'll wrap up because my voice is definitely going by this point. We saw this in another live stream as well. Really like the character, like the line quality. There's so much about this piece. Just I love the charm, the curiosity, the appeal of it. It's just beautiful. But again, we have this gradient of colors, this just symphony of colors that all are so harmonious. They all work together so well. It draws the eye in just a beautiful way. It's got flow to it as an image, but also as colors. And I just really, really like this. I don't know that I have much analysis beyond I really, really like this piece because at this point, we're 2 hours in and my brain's pretty fried. You can only do this for so long before you're like, yeah, that's pretty. So I will come back to this one again and really, really dig into the color. But this is the kind of piece that I don't even necessarily want to analyze. I just want to look at it and just enjoy. This piece I enjoy. It's just a feel thing where I dig it. Okay. To wrap up, we went through a bunch of stuff and talked about a bunch of things. Oh, yeah, that was a heck of a live stream. And we'll get to a quick Q&A, which actually I'll start now officially. If you have a question or, just a comment, feel free to let me know now and we'll talk about it. Whether it be on something that we talked about already or anything else, art and animation or whatever. I'll talk about Hunter x Hunter more. Just, feel free to ask anything that you have. But before, as people are formulating questions, if we have any, I will kind of do a quick recap. And let me swap here. Okay. So takeaways for today. First of all, there's a lot of boldness here in these pieces that we're analyzing. So as I progress forward in my own work, I'm going to need to remember to be bold, to go for it, to kind of get that thing out of my head that's holding me back. I'll go real quickly to this piece that I did of pancetta and Bidoof, right? This is one that I showed recently. I started it on a live stream and then I finished it up later. I really like this piece. It's one of my favorite pieces that I've done, I think, especially recently. But is it bold? No. I clearly played it safe here. I went with my subtle colors. I went with my safe choices because I knew that they would work. And sure enough, they did. I think that this piece overall works very well, but it's not got that boldness, right, that we've seen in all of these other pieces. And so that's something that I just have to keep repeating in my own head. Be bold, be bold, be bold. It means that I'm probably going to need to do some experiments that are not, they're not, for show necessarily. Lily says same hues though. Yeah, I guess that's fair. But yeah, So that's something that I'm definitely going to need to keep in mind. And as I continue forward, we're going to have to keep being bold. As Highly pointed out, we got a lot of warm tones here. That's something that I need to keep in mind. I apparently am drawn to warm tones, so I need to keep that consciously in my head as I'm choosing colors. And also, it might be a good opportunity for me to break free of that and try a piece that's just cool tones, maybe like one accent of warmth. But if I tried a piece that was significantly cool tones, I think it might push me a lot and might help me as an artist to grow. And then I had here noted striking, this idea of striking colors. That again, we go back to that idea of boldness, to have that. And I think that that will help. So that kind of wraps up the. Eiley says those saturated backgrounds look tricky to work with. I agree. I actually put some saturated backgrounds on the pancetta piece, and I tried a bunch of things, using the hue saturation sliders and stuff. And I couldn't get it to work. It wasn't working. And I was just like frustrated because I really wanted to make that background bold, but I had already picked a bunch of subtle colors and I would have had to go back in and completely redo the colors I had already picked. And I was like, oh, I've already been working on this for like 6 hours. And I just, I kind of gave up at that point. So I have to kind of decide now. And I've had to decide this multiple times, and each time I've decided to walk away. But I need to decide if I'm going to go back to that piece and try to mess with it more. I don't want to because I have finished it. I feel like it's done, but I have to decide because it keeps coming back around where I keep thinking, I should really go back and try again. I don't know about anybody else, but one of the hardest things for me as an artist and sometimes even as a human being is redoing stuff. Like, I don't like redoing things. I like doing stuff once, especially if it's done well, and then being done and moving on. But in art, a lot of times you're going to have to redo things. If you're familiar with the very famous painting, The Scream, it's the guy with, my iPad's going crazy. He's the guy on the bridge with the look. Looks like he's screaming. He's actually not screaming. The name of the scream is coming from the scream of nature in the background. Anyway, that's a different story. Anyway, what I never knew and found out more recently was that that artist did like a dozen at least versions of that painting. And the initial ones that they did were not even remotely close to as extreme and weird, right, as surreal as that one that we all know is super famous. But he kept going back to that idea over and over and over again. It was just like, I want to push this. There's something there, and I'm not there yet. And uh could have quit, and we would have never had the Scream as a painting, but just kept coming back to it over and over again. And so that's what it takes sometimes. I said earlier, there's that other artist who only did 2 paintings a year. That may just be what has to be. It's hard because in our current age, there's so much content out there that it feels like if you're not producing quickly, you just fall away, and that's the end of anybody paying attention to what you're doing. So that's just something we have to deal with in the current world. People working for 6 months on one painting doesn't happen as often as it used to. Now it's like, well, what'd you do today? What'd you do in the last 10 minutes? Because I'm already on to the next thing. And that's hard. So I'm gonna have to think about that more too. I'm gonna have to maybe disappear for a while. I don't say disappear. I'm still gonna do live streams and stuff, but I may need to be like, hey, no more art from me for the next 6 months because I'm gonna work on one piece. Maybe not 6 months, but like 4 weeks. We'll see. I don't know, but that might be something I have to consider. Um, uh, Apologies, can't pronounce the name, but this person says this is a thing for me. Also, I need to do more iteration. Yeah, me too. So yeah, I think most artists are in that boat, right? Most of us need to do more iteration. We need to try again and keep tweaking things. it can be so easy to find something you like or like get into a groove and be like, ah, I'm good now. I'm done. But to keep pushing yourself like that, it's something else. It's interesting. All right, cool. Well, oh, we got one more question we'll tackle, and it's a large one that I don't think I could tackle in just one stream. But all it says, any advice for learning drawing and painting for 2D animation? Yes. Okay. So the first thing that I would say is that if we're working on hand-drawn 2D animation, don't even worry about painting uh, to a degree initially. I mean, you can work on it on the side, but in order to do 2D animation well, you need to have such draftsmanship quality, draftsmanship quality of craft that you can sit down with just a pencil and make beautiful movement and stuff. So that it's uh, when you're working for 2D animation specifically, you're gonna need to get those drawing skills as good as you can make them, and you'll keep making them better and better each time you do it, and as you get older and more experienced in things. But it's going to be such an important quality. So in a sense, don't try and combine them, drawing and painting. Painting is almost its own thing. If you're going to work just on 2D animation, you want to get that drawing skill as solid as you can make it. Keep working on that drawing skill. Keep doing that. And then there's the animation aspect too, because we can make beautiful drawings, but if they don't move well, then that's a whole nother subject. And in that instance, when you're working towards your animation skill, do not work clean. Do not work beautifully in a sense. Work rough, work loose. You're When you're practicing animation, you want it to be smooth and beautiful in terms of movement, less so than you care about each individual drawing. I remember I had a wonderful art teacher, animation teacher once, and she said one of the hardest things for her, because this was way back in the day before anybody really did digital animation, and you would roll drawings. So you'd put your drawings in between different fingers and you would roll them to see it move. And she said when she was in school, her teacher would come by and roll her drawings, and he would roll them so violently they'd get crinkled. But at that stage of animation, like at that part of the animation process, in the early stages, you need to see the movement more than you need to see pretty drawings. You need to make sure that the movement is working. And it bothered her because she loved making pretty drawings. And so it was something for her to kind of get over, to make things rougher and to not worry about each individual drawing so much as the movement. And so when you're working in animation, you do need to really focus on that movement. But at the same time, the drawing is the other part of that coin. It's two sides. You have to do beautiful drawings, and then you have to make them move beautifully. It's really hard. Animation is hard. Uh, and I'm not say that to discourage you, but to prepare you as you're learning it. Just keep in mind, always keep in the back of your head, if it feels hard, it's because it is. It's why there's not a lot of 2D animators. So hopefully that's some early advice. I will say this, and I'll pop open the little scrolly thing that Ferdinand made. Ferdinand has made a 2D animation class on Animator Island. It's at animatorisland.com/2D. So if you want more on that particular topic, not only is there a lot on the YouTube channel, but there is animatorisland.com/2D that you can check out, a 2D animation course. He's put a ton of work into it. He's a very good teacher, which we've talked about before. So I definitely recommend that if you're interested. And I will try and remember to put a link to that also in the description of this video. The recording will go live shortly. So if you missed any part of this live stream, if you're just coming in now, you can always go back and watch the rest of it. It is 2 hours and 12 minutes, which makes it officially the longest live stream I've done personally around here. I hope it was enjoyable. I hope it was useful. And I do want to say, again, thank you so much for showing up and commenting and asking questions and making, insightful remarks. Highly, you especially always manage to do that, and I appreciate that to great amounts. It's art can be a very solo experience. It can be lonely at times because it's just you and a pencil or whatever it is. So to have this sort of interaction is great. Um, so we appreciate you showing up for the live streams and for hanging out with us at Animator Island. And that's all we've got for today. So the next live stream from me is going to be coming up next Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So you can mark your calendars if you like. I'm not sure what the subject is going to be yet. Still deciding. I have determined that I need to figure out faces better. By that, I mean I need to think about facial proportions and then I need to think about the individual elements. Like I need to do a hard study on just eyes. Like I've done studies on eyes before. What I mean is, I need to determine what kind of eyes I want as my default style. Same for noses and mouths. So I've started collecting pieces together to that end. So one of the future live streams, I'm not sure if it'll be next Monday, but one of the future ones is going to be on eyes and noses and mouths, and then also facial proportions in general. So if that interests you, look forward to that in the coming weeks, hopefully. And that's it for today. So again, I'm JK from Animator Island. Thanks again for showing up, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.